There's a piece of advice I always give people when we talk about self-defense laws and legal issues. And that is go talk to police officers in your area, go talk to lawyers who actually plead self-defense cases. Why? Because there are many misunderstandings and errors and myths when it comes to self-defense laws. So with that in mind, I asked the Facebook group about some things that were very important when it comes to self-defense in their country, because we have people from all over the world, but that are misunderstood or flat out ignored despite them being important. And we got a fair number of really interesting examples that should give you some pause when it comes to wherever you are. So again, we're talking specific countries here, and I'm going to repeat the advice I just gave to the beginning. Talk to police officers in your area, in your country, in your state, and so on. Same thing with self-defense specialized lawyers, because what is relevant to you might not be relevant to somebody else in their country, and so on. So the first one that I gave, which still to this day surprises many people, and that is that nunchucks are illegal in Belgium. You're not allowed to have them, and there is no exception for martial arts training. A lot of people think there is none. So if you are walking around with nunchucks, if you have them in your car, quote unquote, to go to your martial arts class, it's still illegal. Doesn't matter what your sensei says, doesn't matter what you think about the law, you're not allowed to have them. Do I agree with that? No, but that's besides the point. Your agreement is not needed for the law to be in effect. Now we can talk about silly laws, laws that make no sense, laws that are antiquated, and the fact that if laws are not enforced, are they actually laws? While technically they're still on the books, but they're not enforced. So that's a whole different discussion. The interesting part happens when you use, in this case, for instance, nunchucks in my country for self-defense. But by default, you are not in the right. You cannot claim self-defense because you used a prohibited weapon. So that is a very, very common misconception here amongst martial artists. They think, well, I can have them. No, you can't. So moving on, we get a few more ones. Gavin, who's in South Africa, and he says that criminals have more rights than victims. That's something you hear a lot when it comes to self-defense laws. And his comment was that people misunderstand the life over property rule, which is another very important one. Same thing over here. You cannot protect property and claim self-defense. Self-defense can only be done towards human beings and yourself and others. So the archetypical case that I usually give is that technically speaking, again, technically speaking, if somebody just walks into your house, grabs your TV and walks out and doesn't lay a finger on you, doesn't threaten you, and so on, technically it's going to be difficult to claim self-defense if you use violence to stop the guy. Again, it gets more complicated than that, but again, we're talking about mythology and misunderstandings when it comes to the law. And there's a few more that I wanted to share. And for instance, one that Jerry said is that a karambit is a specific type of knife. And it says you can't really have it in New York because the ring that you use to hold on to the knife, it falls under the brass knuckle restriction. And he says that many people who come from out of state don't realize this. So you're walking around with your karambit knife, and maybe it has the right length and all that kind of stuff, but that ring means that in the eyes of the law of that state or that city or wherever you are, it is considered brass knuckles and they're prohibited. So it is this field of nuance that I often like to discuss when whatever the topic is, because that's where the true knowledge and experience shines through when you talk to people. Is that they can tell, like, well, in this case, this is actually okay. However, we include this one element and all of a sudden there's a problem. And in this case, there's apparently several types of knives that you can carry in New York. However, you can't carry the karambit. And again, if anything is wrong about this, then I blame Jerry, as I always do, because he's been a friend of mine for many years. So keep that in mind. And again, this is a good example of why you shouldn't just rely on your instructor when it comes to legal matters. And that includes me. I always tell my students that, is that I'll give you my interpretation of the law that we are subjected to here. However, talk to an expert about this. I do not give legal advice. I am not allowed to give legal advice because I'm not a lawyer, because that is a profession that you actually have to have a degree in law for before you can give legal advice. So anything that I share in that case is just going to be my opinion on my interpretation of the laws here. So the other thing that Jerry said is the corollary is that it doesn't matter if you buy brass knuckles that say paperweight, they are still illegal. And it's the same here. There's a lot of drive for several years now towards improvised weapons, disguising weapons in different ways as tools, etc., or using a particular type of tool, then making small modifications that make it more functional as a weapon, with the idea that you can then claim, well, this is just a tool, it's not a weapon. Now, in certain environments, typically not in modern Western countries, but in certain environments, that might fly for a variety of reasons that I won't go into here. Over here, for instance, where I live, anything you use as a weapon, if it's a weapon or if it is a tool that you use as a weapon, is considered a weapon for the law. So legally speaking, it becomes a weapon through the use of it as a weapon. Even if it's, to stay with John Wick, if it's just a pencil and you kill 2 men with it, well, for the law, that then becomes a weapon instead of a pencil. Don't have to agree with it, but that doesn't change what the law says and how it views things. So we've got a couple of examples like this already now, and there's one more that I want to give from Dom, who lives in Japan, and he shared an interesting document, a link to a document with it, and it actually comes from a British embassy in Tokyo, and the title is "Information Pack for British Prisoners in Japan after being arrested the first 72 hours and beyond." And I'm not going to give the whole explanation, so I invite you to join the group and look for Dom's comment. Basically, he says the police arriving after just a minor bar fight, quote unquote, and they take you back to the station. Now, in our Western mindset, that is like, okay, I'll be out tomorrow, worst case scenario, and so on, because it's just a fight, right? You're drunk and you get into a fight with a guy, or you're both drunk, whatever, and ends up in a fight, get arrested, they put you in jail, and you're like, okay, they're going to let me sleep it off, and tomorrow I'm out. But you don't realize that they can keep you for 23 days without charge. I repeat, 23 days without being charged with a crime. That is a law apparently specific to the country of Japan, which I didn't know of. But I don't plan on getting in bar fights if I ever would visit Japan, which is on my bucket list. But I digress. And the fun part, Dom says, is that after 23 days, they could release you and immediately rearrest you and reset the clock for the next 23 days. And he says that there's a 99% conviction rate and a 95% confession rate. And obviously that has nothing to do with you staying, for pretty much 50 plus days in custody without actually knowing that you're ever going to get out, that you're going to be charged and this and that. So cultural difference. Over here, that is very difficult to do. In most Western countries, it's pretty difficult to arrest somebody without charge and then keep them there for over a month. Apparently in Japan, it is possible. Now, I end with this last, more extreme example from our Western point of view. Why? Because it goes to show that throughout the world, there are going to be vast differences in self-defense laws. The whole point of me starting that discussion was to try to impress on people that just because your martial arts instructor says something doesn't mean he's right. Again, unless he's a lawyer, he has pretty much no legal standing, so to speak, to be an authority on that. Doesn't mean he doesn't have interesting information, but it cannot be legal advice. Speak to a lawyer. Why talk to police officers? Well, because they have experience with the system. They know why people get arrested and what happens with them afterwards, and how the legal system reacts to whatever your claim is that you did in self-defense, and what the reality in the field is going to be like. So that's the first aspect of it. And then the next aspect is that we travel. Human beings have never, in my opinion, have never traveled as much as they have for the last few decades. Flights have become cheaper, hotels have become cheaper, and people go all over the world from all over the world. It's very easy to end up in trouble in a different country, and there are many, many stories of just that happening. So that just because you assume that the laws will be similar enough that you can just behave the way you behave at home while you are staying in a different country. And that is simply not the case. Now, if you start with some erroneous thinking on the self-defense laws of your own country, that you are just flat out wrong with some of the things you think are the law, if you then take those attitudes and opinions to a different country where it's much harsher, for instance, the example I just gave from Japan, they can hold you for over 50 days without charge, well, that should change your opinion on how you act and talk and walk and behave yourself in that different country. I've been to countries where they were extremely strict when it comes to drugs, where you will get the death penalty, basically. I've been to countries where being drunk in public was pretty much seen as a major faux pas. You just don't do that. And I've been to countries where drinking in public was just fine. Mostly my own country, that's typically not that big a deal over here. You have to go out of your way to make it a big deal to most people. They'll just leave you alone. So all that to say that take some time to actually talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about when it comes to self-defense laws in your area. And by that, I don't mean read a blog or listen to a podcast like mine. That's not what I mean. What I mean is actually talking to the person live, human to human, in person, face to face. Ask them questions so you can get solid advice that is nuanced, advice that you can give. You can ask follow-up questions so it becomes more fine-tuned to make sure that you don't have misunderstandings. And then hopefully you can then look at what you do in your training and apply that information so that you make hopefully correct choices should you ever need to use your training. All right, that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this short episode. I've got a bunch more episodes coming up. I took a little bit of a break from podcasting the past 2 months, did some interviews, and but didn't put out a lot of other episodes. Why? Because I needed a break. It's too much work for me, and there's only one me of doing all the work. So things should be back on schedule now, and I've got a bunch of interesting guests that I already interviewed, and those episodes will start airing as of next week. In the meantime, like, share, subscribe. As always, check out the Patreon for a whole lot of unique and basically content that is not available anywhere else, and starts at really, really democratic prices with an archive that is now 5.5 years old, filled with monthly content. All right, that's it. Enough of the plug. Bye-bye.